The town of Cree had once stood as a haven to the weary wanderer. A mining town by trade, it was renowned for the mines that plunged deep into the mountain whose base it lay under. The great shadow of this titan made many of the residents feel safe and secure. However, this all changed when a dark cloud seemed to cover their sunny town. The mines, which once ran rich with rubies and gemstones, was drying up. The people could no longer make a living. The mines suffered no less than 4 cave-ins, just from the miners' mad attempts to find something of value. People began to leave Cree, seeking new homes and new livelihoods. That is, until he came. A man arrived some 2 years ago. He was a man with no hair and missing a right arm. His long crimson cloak drifted behind him like a cape, and the lower half of his face was hidden by his collar. His narrow eyes were like those of a serpent, unblinking and cold. Strapped to his back was a massive sword that every local who saw him thought was useless to a one-armed man. When he arrived, the air seemed to grow thick with something unrecognizable, something following this being to their town, and the people felt it as if it were a physical beast. When the mayor came to greet him, the stranger said one thing: "I hunger." Unnerved by his direct and cold statement, the people began to offer food or a feast for him, all of which he ignored. His eyes fell this time on the mayor directly, whose face was drenched with a nervous sweat. The man leaned close, and his gravely voice could barely be heard whispering a single question. "What does your heart desire?" he growled. The mayor was greatly troubled by this question, for it did not come with the honeyed voice of a man who gave away things freely. But he still felt compelled to answer. He wanted the same thing everyone in the town wanted: riches. He wanted to reestablish this town. And the stranger simply smiled. "Then from this day forward, your mines shall never run dry." And he was true to his word. The mines were overflowing with precious stones and minerals. The town began to flourish once more, drawing people back to its stores and to its inns. The town of Cree was thriving economically. But there was something dark at work. The man who revealed himself to be a shaman named Belzar did not leave the town, and he remained as a special guest to the mayor. With each passing day, the town grew richer, but the river near their town was beginning to dry up as fish were left on the banks, rotten and sick. The young and healthy one day were suddenly overcome with disease and misfortune. Rice and grain that once was bountiful was now decaying and scorched as if in fire. Livestock ceased to produce milk or eggs. The town could not have been more rich, but at the cost of something far greater. The people began to urge Belzar to leave them, but the mayor would not allow it. He insisted again and again that Belzar would heal their town as he had healed their mine. But 2 years had passed, and the rich town of Cree was a very forsaken place. In time, the people began to plead to the heavens for salvation. For pleading to Belzar only led to more misfortune, and no one could forget the first phrase he had said when he entered their village, for it was now on all of their lips: "I hunger." It was on a midsummer afternoon that another figure approached the town, and as he came, a stir went through the people. He carried himself like a mere traveler, but they could all sense a strange presence about him. He entered Cree and looked around through tired eyes, and then saw a man carrying a pail of water. "Sir," the stranger asked, "might I trouble you for a drink?" "I don't have any to spare, stranger," he answered. "Water is rationed nowadays. There's just so little of it. And what little here, it would make you sick anyway." "Why live in such a way?" the stranger asked. "I'm a miner. I worked the mines my whole life," he answered. "I know no other life than this." "This is not life. My friend, let me see your water." The miner looked curiously at the stranger, and then held out his pail. The stranger held out his hand over the pail and then sighed. "Your land is sick," he whispered. "We know this, but there's nothing we can do. We don't know what's causing it, and when we go to seek help from Belzar the shaman, he sometimes helps and other times ignores." At the sound of the name Belzar, the stranger stiffened and shook his head. "Your shaman is foolish indeed, and a knave to say the least." He touched the pail and closed his eyes. "I call upon the one spirit, heal this water and bless this man and his house." A wave seemed to wash over the miner and his body, and he felt a slight spring to his step that he hadn't felt in years. What have you done? I have healed you and your water, the stranger smiled. It's safe for you and your family. But in exchange, take me to the center of town. I'd like to meet this Belzar the shaman. Realizing this man was likely a shaman as well, he nodded and led him towards town, where people were already coming outside to see what was causing this pressure they sensed in the air and the ground. With each step the stranger took, the town felt a new resonance. Sir, what is your name? The miner asked. You may call me Nomad, he answered. As the people all stared and whispered about the arrival of Nomad, this all drew out the shaman Belzar, who was looking slightly uncomfortable with Nomad's arrival. He approached the town square and looked to Nomad, whose eyes locked with his. There was a moment of silence between the two men, and several families and individuals observing from a distance quickly backed away further, fearing for their own safety. Behold, Belzar cried, we are graced with the arrival of an uninvited guest. Grace would do this town a great deal of good, Nomad answered. Belzar did not smile, but merely narrowed his glaring eyes. You are not welcome here, wanderer, he growled darkly, his voice low like gravel. Leave at once. You do not have the authority to command me, Nomad snarled back. The venom in his voice even sent a chill down Belzar's spine. The power flowing off of these two was intoxicatingly thick. Belzar took a few steps forward, but did not dare raise a hand against the Nomad. And Nomad merely stared back, unmoving. I sense that you, like me, serve a spirit. What did you sacrifice to yours? Belzar asked. All spirits demand payment, as you can see. He motioned to the stump of his arm. My price was high, but nothing I was not prepared to offer. I gave my name and my identity, Nomad answered. I am his servant forevermore. You mean you're a slave? Belzar mocked, raising his finger accusingly. I can see the shackles of your spirit now. You are its slave, blindly obeying and following it like a lost dog. You have no autonomy. You do not just pay with your name, you pay with your pride, your ambitions, your freedom. Nomad's eyes widened at this, and his shoulders tensed up slightly. Is that so? He asked. Belzar gave a faint smile and held out his hand as his eyes began to burn bright blue. I serve the spirit Agaris, a spirit of great power, but also of giving, Belzar explained. In exchange for a mere limb, I have all this power. I live how I please. I go where I wish. My will supersedes all other things. I do not wear the shackles of a slave as you do. It pains me to see a shaman such as you with no will of your own. Nomad did not answer, but his eyes did narrow somewhat, as if thinking over his words. It must be very difficult serving your spirit so fervently and without rest. Indeed, Nomad answered. I admit it is a trial by fire most days. Then tell me, shall I free you? Free me? Nomad asked. You must have a goal, correct? All men want something. Something they can possess for their own. We all hunger. Is there something you hunger for in this life? Money? Fame? Power? Speak. Share with me. What do you hunger for? At first, Nomad did not reply, but his body was indeed beginning to tremble somewhat, and the thickness of his power seemed to wane. Nomad took a single step back and closed his eyes as memories spilled through his mind of a small boy surrounded by bigger and stronger siblings, of being forgotten, of being small. I once, Nomad admitted, longed for acknowledgement. And with the power of Agaris, you can have that and more. You can have what you want, he whispered. Let me show you. Let me offer you another chance, boy, to sate your hunger. You're right, Nomad whispered. I once did yearn for fame and glory, as you say. I grew up amongst men and women greater than I. Then why suffer under the thumb of one who will not let you reach your true aspirations? Belzar asked. He walked close and reached out to Nomad as if to take his hand. Come with me. Let me rid you of the curse you bear. But you see, Belzar, Nomad continued, you may be right about me, but you're wrong about my relationship to the One. With a flash like brilliant fire, Nomad's eyes roared with blue fire as the tattoos on his body glowed gloriously, like his very flesh was igniting. Belzar flew back in disbelief. "What? I am in no way a slave to the One," Nomad answered. "I am free, and I have autonomy. But I know that my will and my wishes are folly. The things I hunger for are fleeting and empty. Fame and glory, acknowledgement from mortals, these things will never satisfy the hunger I have. The more worldly wealth and gratification you accumulate, the more empty you become, until there's nothing but an empty void of gluttony that can never be satiated." Nomad held out his hand as the very ground trembled from his aura. "I know of your spirit, Agares. The spirit of greed and gluttony. He has given you power in exchange for what you believe is freedom, but in truth it is most cunning chain around your neck. You mock me! The curse of Agares infects this town. You give wealth but leave men's souls and bellies empty, yet you yourself do not suffer these things. You must satiate Agares, or suffer yourself, am I correct?" Nomad asked. Belzar did not answer but sneered and drew his mighty sword, the metal flashing dangerously in the sun. "Tell me, Belzar, was your arm all that you paid for Agares' power? Or perhaps did you lose something even more precious?" "Be silent!" Belzar snapped. "I'll sever your head from your shoulders!" He attacked with maddening speed, his spirit loaning him great reserves of power. Nomad's eyes flashed. He ducked the blade, raising his hand up, brushing his hand against Belzar's shoulder, almost as if dusting it off, but the shockwave of his brush threw him sideways, as if he'd been hurled by a mighty wind. Belzar rebounded off of a crumbling shack and snarled angrily. Nomad glared back at him, and suddenly Belzar seemed to be hunching over, his body twitching dangerously. His eyes now turned a horrifying crimson color as the veins in his bald head pulsated. "I hunger." Nomad watched in horror as the figure that was Belzar rushed him again, but this time with a speed so great Nomad had to throw himself to the ground to avoid him. Belzar missed Nomad with his sword and ravenously bit the air as if he had intended to bite Nomad. "Hunger." "Now I see," Nomad whispered darkly. "Your arm was not the price you paid for Agares' power. It was something far more important." Belzar spun, almost fully possessed by the power of Agares. With a guttural roar, he came at Nomad again. Nomad lowered himself and closed his eyes, letting himself surrender, but not to Belzar. "My master," Nomad whispered, "I beg your blessing. Be my strength and my protection." A great torrent of power overcame Nomad, and when he opened his eyes, the brilliant light that shone off of his body seemed to dim even the sun. Belzar slowed, hesitating in his attack, as Nomad shot forward, palm drawn back to strike. "By the power of the greatest of spirits, I will purge you from this place, Agares! Begone!" He thrust his palm forward and struck Belzar full on in the chest. There was a loud and sickening recoil force as a pressure wave erupted in all directions, and a strange light shot clean from Nomad's palm and through Belzar like a thrown javelin. The force of his palm strike sent Belzar flying backwards, blood sprang from his mouth, and his eyes glazed over. When he hit the ground, Nomad returned to his relaxed posture as the glow left his body, returning him to his state from before. And on the ground Belzar remained, open-mouthed, drooling. "In exchange for power, you must satisfy the appetite of your spirit. Yet Agares can never be satisfied. So now neither can you." He approached and leaned down, placing his hand upon Belzar's stump of an arm and taking note of his wound. The ragged and uneven pattern of bite marks were slightly evident. The sight disgusted him, and he rose to his feet. "What a horrible curse you place upon yourself. Who of us is truly the slave, Belzar?" He then looked back at the few people who remained and sighed tiredly. He slumped his shoulders and looked down. "Forgive me," he called. "I fear you will not reap the wealth you did while Belzar's influence remained with you." "Lord," one man cried, dropping to his knees, tears in his eyes, "it is we who beg your forgiveness." "None is needed," Nomad answered. "All I ask is a bed to rest upon for the night, then I will leave." "But what do we do about Belzar?" a woman asked, stepping forward and looking at the dead body. "He can do no more harm to you," Nomad answered. "Carry his body out of this town and take him deep into the woods. There he should wake up, and you will see him no more." Nomad then walked away from Belzar's body and made his way towards the inn on the other side of the town. "I will take my leave." The people gasped and ran to him, pleading with him to stay longer or at least let them offer him thanks. Nomad turned it all away and only accepted a simple, cheap room at the inn. People flocked from all around the town to see him, to thank him, to offer him money or gems, for they had far more than they needed. But Nomad would not even look at their gifts. He simply sat in his room in silence, whispering thanks of his own softly to the spirit who had freed him long ago. "Because of you," Nomad whispered, "I am always satisfied."